So behind me right now, we got the Fuel EX and the Trek Slash. These two bikes have a lot of similarities, but also some big differences, which leave a lot of us asking, which bike is right for me? Now, as I'm going through this side-by-side comparison, just keep in mind I'm just an average rider like you guys, so I'm just gonna cover the things that I find are important, the things that I really look at when I'm trying to compare a couple bikes. There's definitely more detailed reviews out there. There's definitely a lot of pro riders or big global mountain bike networks that have reviews that go over every single minor detail. Leave a question below if you guys want to know anything more, but this is the stuff that I really think is important when looking at these two bikes. So here's how this is going to go down. We got the side-by-side comparison going on here, which is really going to give us the best way, I think, to be able to look at these bikes, compare them side by side, talk about the similarities, talk about the differences, look at some of those angles. Look at the difference in the seat post angle right there for the seat tube angle. You can already see that really cool side by side, gives you a cool perspective, and I think the best way to be able to talk about these bikes. So let's start with the similarities. Both of these are the 8 models. So I got the Trek Slash 8, the Trek Fuel EX8. For those of you guys that aren't familiar with the Trek lineups start with the base model at either like a 5. So like for the Fuel EX, you got the Fuel EX5, which is the base model. The Fuel EX7, which is kind of like another base model. For the Slash, you got the Slash 7, which is their base model. And then you move up into the Slash 8 and the Fuel EX8, which is definitely what I would call the best bang for the buck model and represents what I think most of you guys should be looking at, especially if you guys are just trying to get into these bikes for the best price and get a bike that you're probably not going to have to do a lot of upgrades with. So let's start by talking about all the similarities. Both of these being the 8 model means that both of them have aluminum frames. On those aluminum frames, they got the Minolink flip chip in the rear, which allows you to run a 27.5 wheel in the rear if you want. Both of them right now are set up 29er front and back, so 29-inch wheels in the back, 29-inch wheels up front on both of these bikes. Both of them have the Line Comp 30 wheel set, which means it's aluminum wheel set with the Bontrager hub, and I think it's like 110 points of engagement, so you hear that when I'm riding. Nice, good, loud, high engagement hub. And they both have the XR5 team issue wheels on there, which means I'm gonna have the same exact wheels on both XR5 front and rear, same rolling resistance, which I think is a good way to compare bikes because it allows you to get things like that to be as similar as possible to really be able to feel the differences between these two bikes. Now, other similarities on these bikes is obviously the Bontrager parts that come on them, like the Bontrager dropper post. That's a 34.9 diameter dropper post right there, and then just the Bontrager cockpit. Slight difference in the grips with these not having the extra lock-on and with these being the pro grips that have dual lock-ons right there, but still Bontrager stem, Bontrager bars. And then the components that come on these, they are different. The Fuel EX has more of a Shimano build to where the Slash bike back here has the SRAM build, but still mid-grade components with the SRAM Code R 4-piston brakes on the Slash. You got the Shimano 4-piston SLX brakes right here with the larger rotor in the front and the smaller rotor back in the rear. Both of these 180 rotors in the rear on those 4 pistons. For the drivetrain, you got the SRAM GX drivetrain on the Slash back there. So Eagle GX drivetrain is a great drivetrain. For the Fuel EX, I would say just a slightly better drivetrain because it's got the SLX, which is kind of comparable to a GX drivetrain, but then it's got the XT shifter on there, derailleur, and the XT shifter on here, and that's really where we start to look into the differences on these two bikes. So starting with the frame on the differences, you got that minnow link flip chip in the rear on both of them, which enables you to go mullet. But the Fuelie X is kind of this newer hybrid kind of model of frame that has all these additional adjustments. So on the shock right here, they have an additional flip chip that allows you to make the shock more progressive and run a coil shock in there. On the slash back there, you can see there is no flip chip right there, but the angle on that shock, you can see that angle right there is already set up pretty progressive and kind of ready for that coil shock. Doing the side-by-side comparison between these two shocks, and you can kind of see how much steeper the angle is on that slash, and you can imagine that if you flip this back, it would make this shock a lot steeper. So if you want to throw a coil in this bike, it would probably end up with a similar angle to the slash back there. Now on that suspension and talking about that rear shock, so the Fuelie X has 140 millimeters of travel, and this is probably one of the biggest differences is the suspension travel. Fuelie X 140 millimeters of travel in the rear. Trek Slash back there has 160 millimeters of travel in the rear. Both of them have a nice big shock with a piggyback on there. This Float X shock is actually a shock that I've had on a Trek Slash before, and handles any kind of enduro trails you would want. And then moving up to the fork, really big difference on the fork, you guys, because on the Fuelie X, you got 150 millimeters of travel up front with the Fox Rhythm 36 fork. So great fork and definitely enough travel to be able to handle most of the trails. But on the Slash back here, you got the Zeb fork, 170 millimeters of travel, 38 millimeter stanchions. So just a big, beefy fork. Let's look at both of these next to each other. And from far away, it doesn't really look like that much of a difference. But when you get up close and really just compare these forks, you can really see the difference in diameter on the lowers, and then definitely on the stanchions right here, with that being a 38 mil and that being a 36 mil stanchion right there. So big differences in travel, big differences in the beefiness of that front fork, and some big differences in the frame with those additional adjustments in the rear on the Fuelie X. Also on the headset right here, so the Fuelie X has a 64.5 degree head tube angle, but you can also buy an additional set of headset cups right here that's going to allow you to flip it to a steeper head tube angle of 65.5 or an even slacker head tube angle of 63.5. So let's look at right now how this sits. You can see those forks right there are pretty similar. I mean, 64.5 right here for this head tube angle, and 64.1 for the head tube angle on the Slash back there. When you're looking at them side by side, you can kind of see how that 64.1 makes the front fork just slacken out a tiny bit more, but pretty similar head tube angles on these bikes. However, when you go back to the seat tube angles, that's when you can really see a difference. So effective seat tube angles for the Trek Slash right there, it's less than 2 degrees difference when you look on paper. So I think for the Fuelie X right here, it's like a 77.6, and the Trek Slash right there, it's like a 75 point something on the seat tube angle. But when you look at the difference of what just those couple degrees does, when you get all the way up out there to the end of the dropper, you can really see how much slacker that seat tube angle is on the Slash. And when I was out riding this bike, I could really feel the difference in that seat tube angle being slacker like that, maybe the head tube angle being a little bit slacker as it is right now, and that made a difference on some of those technical climbs that I was doing. So I think looking at these bikes side by side like that is a really interesting way to compare them, but we still have the question a lot of us are asking on which bike is right for me. Those similarities, those differences will I really be able to feel the difference when I get out on the trail to go ride these things? All right, now, before we take these bikes out on the trail, let's do one final difference. Let's throw these bikes on the scale real quick and see how much they weigh. Now you can go online and find the weight on each one of these bikes, but usually that's in a size medium with like no tubeless sealant and no pedals on there. And I know I'm always curious, what does a size large weigh? Got that wheel floating free right there, not touching anything on the ground. And the weight of the Slash is, you see it right there, 36 pounds, 4 ounces. And for everybody else that doesn't weigh in pounds, 16.32 kilograms. On the Fuelie X, I got 15.94 kilograms right there, which is 35.7 pounds. I thought the Slash was going to be a lot heavier, only a pound heavier, because this Fuelie X, like I said, they really made that frame beefier, bigger, and made this a lot closer to an enduro bike. So one other thing I forgot to mention before taking these bikes on a ride is knock block. The Trek Slash has that knock block 2.0, which limits the travel of your handlebars. Now this has never bothered me. I don't do like bar spins or tail whips, and I've never noticed the difference around switchbacks and it limiting my travel, and that it affected my riding at all. But the Fuelie X is free of that. So any of you guys that want to be able to do your crazy bar spins or X ups or whatever, Fuelie X, no knock block. All right, so on the trail test, like any time riding on the trail, it's going to start with climbing. So we got a little climb challenge here. We're going to do back-to-back laps. There's a pretty steep trail that goes up like 300 feet in a really short amount of time with some technical little rocky sections. So kind of like an ultimate climb challenge. Trek Fuelie X versus Trek Slash. Which one should I take first? The Fuelie X? All right, we're starting it on the Fuelie X. We're going to drop the water bottles. I'm going to get them as close as I can to just stock weight, keep it same. So we're gonna get on the Fuelie X first. Boom. Let's see, let's get this into a halfway decent climbing gear. All right, starting on the 11th, speed up. All right, you ready? Go. All right. So the Fuelie X is definitely a good climber. Makes you want to try and go for those more technical spots in the trail and kind of push your limits. Oh man. All right, let's do it again. Go get the Slash. Whew. This is how filming goes. A lot of walking up and down the trail. Get these camera angles. Hey, did you guys know that you can actually order Trek bikes online and either have it sent directly to your bike shop where they'll build it up for you, or even sent right to your door? Now, I'm definitely not here trying to sell you guys. I'm not one of those big global mountain bike networks, just an average guy like you. But if you want to help support the channel, you can click the links below. If you're thinking about buying a Trek Slash or a Fuelie X anyways, or any of the Trek bikes, it's not going to cost you guys anything extra, and it helps me continue to make videos like this. All right, so coming back down now, getting the Slash, gonna do the same thing all over again. Already in that 11th gear. I get it, SRAM and Shimano has slightly different gearing, but close as I can get to similar. Now, this is where, remember I showed you guys that seat tube angle and how much of a difference it makes? Just those couple degrees or less than 2 degrees makes the seat quite a bit slacker. So we'll see what difference that makes. I'm not gonna flip any climb switches, so we'll see if this bike is bobbing anymore with just a slightly different shock fork on there and slightly different suspension layout. But let's quit talking. Whew, go ahead, get to climbing. All right, let's go. Now, I've always thought the Slash climbed good for an enduro bike, but I've never done back-to-back tests against a trail bike like the Fuel EX. So I'm already noticing some big differences in the way this bike climbs compared to the trail bike. So let's go ahead, get to the top of this climb. I'll talk to you guys about what I'm feeling and how these bikes compare. That front wheel, you can just feel it wandering quite a bit more. All right, so that slacker seat tube angle and that little bit slacker fork, I didn't think I'd be able to tell the difference that much, but you really can feel a difference on that front wheel. It just kind of wants to come up off the ground. It's not quite as planted. You don't have quite as much traction on that front wheel, and it, especially when you go up over those technical sections when you kind of have to punch to get up stuff, the front wheel kind of comes up, and I think that has to do with your weight being just a little bit further back with that slacker seat tube angle, and that fork being a tiny bit slacker, and maybe a little bit more bob with that extra suspension, or maybe that the bottom bracket's just a tiny bit taller. Maybe it's just a combination of everything, but being only 1 pound heavier, I didn't think this bike would climb that much worse. This bike still climbs good for an enduro bike, but I could definitely feel a difference. Now we're getting the bikes geared back up. I think we all kind of knew that the Fuel EX was going to, is that thing angled up at me, right? There we go. I think we all knew that the Fuel EX is going to climb better. I was surprised how much better, but now it's time to head over to some drops on this trail called Enduro. It's got this nice wood drop that I'm going to hit and basically just try and hit this thing as fast as I can, drop as far as I can, really push this suspension to the limit and see how the Slash Enduro bike compares to the trail bike when trails get a little bit gnarlier. All right, so here we go here at this drop. Since I started on the Fuel EX on the climb, I'm gonna start on the Fuel EX on the drop. You can see this drop right there at the Slash is, you know, over a bar high, and then you can take it kind of mellow and land on the transition, or you can send it all the way to flat down there and land in the dirt. So we'll start off a little mellow and then see how frisky we're feeling. That should be good enough gear. All right, let's hike a bike. That didn't feel too bad. I think we can send it just a little bit deeper on this trail bike before moving over to the Slash. I knocked the Slash over when I rode.
Yeah.
You stay down, that's right. Oh, shoot. Woo. Oh, man. That one. All right. I landed what? Past the landing on that one. Ah. All right. Travel indicators from this right here. Travel indicators pretty much maxed out on the fork. Definitely maxed out on the rear shock. I'm surprised that isn't all the way up right there. Probably because I was so back heavy when I landed. All right, let's switch over to the enduro bike that's a little more purpose made for big drops like that and see how that feels. Man, I almost wrecked on that one. When I landed, when I felt the suspension reach the end of its travel, it really made my body kind of jolt. So that extra 20 mils definitely would have came in handy right there. I'm gonna try and send it just as big as I just sent it on the Fuel EX. So, out of instinct right there, I like braced for impact because on the Fuel EX, it felt like I was about to crash. But when I landed, even though I still used all the travel, or just about all the travel on this fork and on this shock, when I landed, I kind of, like I said, I braced for impact because I thought it was gonna be as rough as on the Fuel EX, but it actually was a lot smoother. Was able to just ride away. So definitely, when you're pushing your limits, trying to send drops as big as you possibly can, you can do it on the Fuel EX, but the Slash is just gonna handle those drops a little bit better. So which bike is right for you? Well, I think you really got to be honest about the type of riding you do most often. Now, I owned the Trek Slash before, and I currently own the Fuel EX. The reason why I decided to get rid of my Trek Slash was because I wasn't really riding the bike park enough, and I felt like I was just a little bit over-biked for the majority of the trails that I was riding. Sure, the Trek Slash still pedals good enough. It could handle those all-day pedals, but not quite as good as the Fuel EX would. And the Fuel EX could handle just about every trail I wanted to, even those times when I pushed myself just a little bit too far, was sitting in those drops just a little bit too far like I did there earlier. I still could handle most of the riding that I want to do on the Fuel EX. So what type of riding do you do most often? Are you the type of guy that's always going to the bike park, hitting the gnarliest black diamond trails? You don't really care about those longer all-day pedals. You want a bike that's really just capable and can handle anything you want to throw at it, then you might want to get the Slash. However, if you're the type of guy who, yeah, you want to push your limits, you want to hit those drops, those jumps, those black diamond trails, but the majority of the riding you do is stuff that the Fuel EX can handle. You also want to be able to do those longer, like all-day pedals where you're riding with maybe some of your friends that are on an XC bike, then the Fuel EX could be the right bike for you. But you really need to get out to your local bike shop like I did here, so thank you to Zach's Bikes, and demo each one of these bikes. Because until I went out, demoed both of these bikes and did those back-to-back laps, I had no idea how much different it was gonna feel on the Fuel EX compared to the Slash. But that's why I make these videos, you guys, just an average rider like you trying to figure out how to best spend my hard-earned money. So if you guys want to learn more about the Trek Slash, I got a video right there, and you guys have to see all the upgrades I did to my Fuel EX7.